Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Northman. When I started this movie, I think coming into it, I knew what a Robert Eggers film, and I'd seen the advertising, and I thought it'd be made and sort of be like what I expect from a Robert Eggers film. Now, I knew it was not like The Witch or The Lighthouse. It was not going to be horror. That would be stupid. But I knew it was what the adventure film was going to be. But then as I was watching it, it is, lit better than I expected, or lit brighter than I expected. It kind of plays differently than I thought it would. And pretty early on, I realized this is not the kind of Robert Eggers film I am used to, and I gave up those notions of that. But I also think the interesting thing about this is if you look at his sensibility as a director, he's very much into historical accuracy, the way people talk, the way people dress, the tools they use, everything like that. And it gives it kind of this old musky, like you found this weird thing in a book kind of a movie. And of course, that's the guy who would want to do a very faithful adaptation to the legend of Amleth as his, big budget action movie thing. In a way, it makes a lot of sense, but it does feel a little different. It feels unusual, but I still got into this in kind of like the old school sword and sorcery way. It reminds me of afternoons on the couch watching Conan the Barbarian, or like the various cartoons of his, or those Roger Corman fantasy films that the Sci-Fi Channel would play, or ones I've seen through Mystery Science Theater. It reminded me of those, but good. Although Conan the Barbarian's, I think, a good movie, but this felt like the kind of intelligent, grunty, super fantasy, like I'm gonna get a glass of mead and drink it while I watch this movie. I hung out with some people and they were like really into Beowulf, which I didn't know until I was there, and they were like, let's have a glass of mead, which is just they put beer in a fancy glass. But I did drink a lot because I didn't really like Beowulf, but this is the kind of movie you could do that with, I guess. Basically, this is the kind of like deep nerd kind of metal fantasy kind of thing, but also being very historically accurate, almost painfully, in terms of like the brutality it's showing you on screen, which I think is also very intense in some sequences. You're just like, whoa. But this is like, that's what we're in, you know what I mean? That's what it is. This is based on the legend of Amleth, which is considered a influence on Hamlet, or so Shakespeare said in an interview. I think he said this in like Sonic Youth or something, where his big two influences on Hamlet, or so believed that both those things influenced Hamlet. But you can sense some of it. I'm not the biggest. I've read Hamlet and I've seen a few versions. I guess one with Ethan Hawke. Is that a reference that he's in this? I wonder. In the modern Hamlet, he's the son. In the old school Robert Eggers, this thing might have influenced Hamlet. He's the dad. I'm sure that's a reference. But it's about the story of Amleth, who is with his parents, and then his father is killed right after he is kind of like shown that he can be the new king. But his father is killed, his mother is kidnapped, and he runs away because he's just kind of a weak little kid, and he's going to come back and inflict his revenge on his uncle who has done these things. He grows up and becomes Alexander Skarsgård and is ripped as all hell, of course, and comes back and tries to seek his revenge. This is kind of a very old school kind of revenge story, which is also, I think, one of the things that makes this, I think, a lot of fun in a lot of ways, but it also makes it really intriguing because you're not sure what crazy stuff's going to happen. Bjork as a sorceress is partly one of them. I didn't realize it was written by someone who is a friend of Bjork, co-written, who also worked with the Sugar Cube, so makes sense, I guess. But this, I've seen a few. I'm a big fan of the Icelandic film When the Raven Flies. I really love that movie a lot. I've not seen the other films in that trilogy, and I really should, because I really like that movie. And this felt like kind of the old school kind of tales I've heard of Scandinavia and Iceland. I'm not an expert of any of that stuff, and I'm not going to pretend to be. So as you can tell, I'm just using very limited things, but it reminds me of those kind of the brutalness of those stories, but also kind of the epic nature of them that kind of like get you through them. You can kind of imagine someone telling you that story around the fire and you being invested at the twists and turns as it goes on. It might feel like it's more of a simple thing, but it's really, I don't think is. I also think this film is a lot more mainstream, but not in like a negative way. I think when people say that, they go, oh, that's not cool. This is kind of like Robert Eggers style, but also very mainstream. Like I honestly do believe you could cut a trailer for this movie and make it look much more mainstream than doing the Robert Eggers one, which I understand there's some confusion. People don't like this movie because it's not like his usual style, so maybe they just should have done that. I think you could make a superhero trailer out of this and like get people to show up for the Northman. I mean, you know, but it does feel like one of those old school kind of fantasy epics that, you know, would even influence things like Star Wars, or to a much lesser extent Willow, I guess, with, you know, all these various characters that matter and have done them wrong and things like that. It feels like that in its bones, but it also feels like this old story that I don't think it is trying to show us how we would understand it now, like the trauma that's going on, the violence, what it means and all that stuff. I think it's trying to show it to us as a matter of fact of what it is, which is, I think, such a different thing from what you expect from an auteur. This is actually probably one of the more interesting adaptations I've seen, because it feels like somebody purposely went, well, my perspective is this story's cool. That's my perspective, basically. This story is awesome. Why would I get in the way of it? Why would I have a perspective? Why would I need to do that? And I like that about Robert Eggers, but it does almost feel so natural within his style, because his style is to show you the history as it is. And if this story is in fact history, if it really did influence Hamlet and all that stuff, then it is historical. Then restoring this story in this film would be part of that. I can't think of this as anything but accurately portraying it, and I think he does an impeccable job. Like, this is quite the epic. Like, after I was done, I was like, I think I want to watch that again. Like, I almost think this will do better on streaming and at home, because there's so many things you like kind of want to dive into and rediscover and things like that. It's not, I mean, I think the epicness can kind of win you over and soar you in, but there's so many kind of interesting things about it. And I think it can be like kind of weird and psychological, while also playing as like one of those grand adventure kind of epic stories, which I really did quite like. Also, Alexander Skarsgård needs to be doing more like cool, crazy, buffed out roles, as well as like, you know, you have Anna Taylor-Joy and Willem Dafoe. I guess that's the Robert Eggers company, acting company. Anna Taylor-Joy is great as his kind of love interest. Nicole Kidman, I think, deserves way more credit. Like, the amount of different kind of directors she works with for someone who's as insanely famous as she is really honorable, but also that she gives a really interesting performance in certain turns. It just like shows like you never expect what you're getting from her. And I do wonder sometimes certain parts of the story, I think with her, whose perspective am I reading the story from? Because there's certain things I don't really want to get into. I guess it's not a spoiler because this story is super old, but there's certain things when they look back at things or they talk about things that happened and you as a viewer heard them, are you viewing it through him as a kid, or are you reading it through her, through past trauma and things like that? I wonder that quite frequently when going back in it, and I think sometimes this film is dealing with these things. I feel like there's a lot going on underneath. Like, this is the kind of fantasy film, like, I think fantasy growing up, there will always be various fantasy films on. Like, I remember The Weekend Willow came out on VHS, for example, but it was on like everywhere. It was such a big movie. I mean, not really, but on VHS for one weekend in Baltimore, Maryland. But like Lord of the Rings or something, like this is the kind of film like I sort of want to sink my teeth into. I sort of want to go through again. I mean, it has like volcano sword fights. I'm sorry, naked volcano sword fights. It's not fucking around, you know. Not those swords, guys. Get your minds out of the gutter. It's almost hard to read because it's sort of like, it is presenting the thing. This is so metal as fuck. Like, it's like, I know it predates metal, but that's how metal it is. I think it was metal before there was metal, but it is metal. I don't know. It is like, it feels like I'm watching a Metalocalypse skit sometimes. It feels like I'm watching those gory kind of metal, heavy metal tales and stuff like that, but at the same time being very historically accurate. It's an interesting, odd movie, but how many epics do you get that do something like that? And I think like Robert Eggers kind of puts you in that avenue. I'm curious what his filmography is going to be now, because now I've seen he's interested in doing different tales and I really don't know what to make him at this point. If you had asked me before this film, I felt like I knew who he was, and now I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, it feels like I do know, but almost feels like the possibilities of him are so much more opened up after watching this film. I think this is a substantial piece in a filmography that's been pretty flawless so far. It's one that I definitely want to revisit, and I think if you are a fantasy person, if you liked Lord of the Rings, if you like Game of Thrones, things like that, I think this is a perfect movie to put on. And even if you're like, I'm not really into the art house, or elevated horror, whatever the fuck, of like The Witch and The Lighthouse and things, I still think you probably might like this a lot more. It's so exciting and interesting, and there's so many twists and turns. Like, I would find this film a very hard film to get bored with. And the fact that it's based on a story from so long ago and made by a director who's not known to making things exciting, I think really says like how exciting and surprising this film can really be. But you know, maybe I'll get my glass of mead and not undermine this film with its director's previous totally artistic moves, and just like chill out and, you know, watch a barbarian ravage his revenge against his uncle for killing his father, and, you know, sit back and enjoy the bloody mess that is The Northman. So if you've seen The Northman and you'd like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.